They laughed when they saw her name on the guest list. A former maid. A woman they believed life had already erased. No designer dress. No wealth. No power. Just a reminder of who used to scrub their floors and polish their silverware while they sipped champagne and discussed stock portfolios. They invited her for one reason only, to humiliate her one last time. To parade her poverty in front of 300 guests. To remind her, and everyone else, exactly where she belonged in their world. At the bottom. Forgotten. Erased. But on the morning of the wedding, as guests gathered beneath crystal chandeliers and string quartets played Vivaldi, a sound echoed outside that stopped every conversation cold. The low, unmistakable hum of a Rolls-Royce engine. Heads turned. Whispers spread. And when the rear door opened, a woman stepped out. Poised. Elegant. Radiant. A woman they never expected to see again. And behind her, 3 children. Triplets. With faces that looked dangerously, undeniably familiar. The groom went pale. His bride went silent. And the entire wedding froze. This is not just a story about revenge. It's a story about pride, silence, and the quiet power of patience. Stay with me, because the truth behind those children will change how you see this story forever. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. And also drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Are you in New York? US? South Africa? London? Manila? We want to know who's part of this community. Now let's get into the full story, because what happened next will leave you speechless. Her name was Evelyn Carter. Before uniforms and bowed heads, before she became invisible in the eyes of the wealthy, she had dreams. Real dreams. The kind that kept her up at night, not from fear, but from hope. Evelyn grew up in a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. Her father, Thomas, worked double shifts at a steel factory. Her mother, Margaret, was a seamstress who took in alterations from neighbors to make ends meet. They didn't have much. There were no family vacations. No new cars. No college funds waiting in a bank account. But they had something that money couldn't buy: dignity. Her parents taught her that your worth wasn't determined by your bank account. It was determined by your character. By how you treated people when no one was watching. By whether you kept your word, even when it cost you something. Evelyn believed that. She lived by it. And it would both save her and nearly destroy her. She was a bright student. Top of her class in math. She loved numbers because they made sense. They didn't lie. They didn't manipulate. 2 + 2 always equaled 4, no matter who you were or where you came from. Her guidance counselor told her she had potential. That she could go to college. Maybe even become an accountant or a financial analyst. So Evelyn worked for it. She worked weekends at a local diner, serving coffee and eggs to truckers and early morning commuters. She saved every dollar she could. And when she graduated high school, she earned a partial scholarship to a community college 30 miles away. It wasn't Harvard. It wasn't even a state university. But it was hers. She studied accounting and business during the day. Worked nights at a laundromat, folding other people's clothes and counting quarters from the machines. She lived in a shared apartment with 3 other girls, sleeping on a futon in the living room because she couldn't afford her own bedroom. But she didn't complain. She was building something. Slowly. Painfully. But building. Then, halfway through her final semester, her father collapsed at work. A heart attack. Sudden. Severe. He survived, but the medical bills buried them. Insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Not even close. Her mother worked herself to exhaustion trying to keep up. And Evelyn. Evelyn made a choice. She dropped out. She didn't tell her parents until after she'd already withdrawn from her classes. When her mother found out, she cried. Not from disappointment. From heartbreak. Because she knew what that decision cost her daughter. But Evelyn didn't cry. She couldn't afford to. She needed a job. A real job. One that paid enough to help her family survive. That's when she saw the listing. Live-in maid position. Room and board included. Competitive salary. At the Hale estate. She applied. And 3 days later, she was hired. The Hale estate sat on 40 acres of manicured land just outside the city. Tall iron gates. Cobblestone driveways. A mansion that looked like it had been pulled straight from a European postcard. Evelyn arrived on a gray Monday morning with a single suitcase and a nervous stomach. She was greeted by the head of staff, a stern woman named Mrs. Calloway who had worked for the Hales for over 20 years. Mrs. Calloway walked her through the rules. Speak only when spoken to. Stay out of sight when the family has guests. Never ask personal questions. Never make eye contact unless addressed directly. And above all, remember your place. Evelyn nodded. She understood. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to work. Her room was small but clean. A single bed. A narrow closet. A window that overlooked the garden. It was more than she'd had in months. She unpacked her few belongings and reported for duty. The Hale family consisted of 3 members. Edward Hale, the patriarch. A real estate mogul in his early 60s with steel gray hair and a voice that could command a boardroom or crush a subordinate with equal ease. His wife, Margaret Hale, who spent most of her time at charity luncheons and spa appointments, more concerned with appearances than affection. And their youngest son, Richard. Richard Hale was 31 years old. Tall. Handsome in that effortless way that came from good genes and better tailors. He had dark hair that always looked slightly tousled, sharp blue eyes, and a smile that he used like a weapon, charming when he needed something, cold when he didn't. He'd graduated from an Ivy League school with a business degree he'd never really used. His father had given him a title at the company. Executive Vice President of Development. It sounded impressive. But everyone knew it was a placeholder. Richard didn't work. He attended meetings. He signed documents his assistants prepared. He showed up at galas and smiled for photographs. He was a decorative piece in his father's empire. And he knew it. Evelyn's job was straightforward. Clean the common areas. Prepare breakfast. Manage the laundry. Serve dinner when the family entertained guests. She moved through the house like a ghost. Quiet. Efficient. Invisible. And for the first few weeks, that's exactly what she was. Richard barely noticed her. To him, she was just another staff member. Part of the furniture. But Evelyn noticed him. She noticed the way he avoided his father during meals. The way his jaw tightened whenever Edward criticized him in front of others. The way he stared out the library window for hours, holding a glass of scotch he barely touched. He looked like a man trapped in a life he didn't choose. And despite herself, despite knowing better, Evelyn felt something close to sympathy. One evening, about 6 weeks into her employment, Richard found her in the library. It was late. Past 11. Evelyn had been dusting the shelves when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, startled. Richard stood in the doorway, still dressed in his suit from whatever event he'd attended that night. He looked tired. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said. His voice was softer than she expected. "It's fine, sir," Evelyn replied, stepping back toward the door. "I'll finish this tomorrow. You don't have to leave." She hesitated. "I shouldn't be in your way." "You're not." He walked past her, poured himself a drink from the bar cart, and sat in one of the leather chairs. He gestured to the shelves. "Do you read?" Evelyn glanced at the books. Classics. Philosophy. Biographies of men who'd built empires. "When I have time," she said carefully. "Which isn't often." "Pick one." She blinked. "I'm sorry." "Pick a book." "Any book." "Tell me what you choose." She didn't understand the game, but she scanned the shelves. Her eyes landed on a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. She pulled it out. Richard smiled. Actually smiled. "That's a good choice." "You've read it?" she asked before she could stop herself. "3 times." He took a sip of his drink. "It's about a man who loses everything. Gets betrayed. Spends years in prison. And then, he comes back. Reinvents himself. Takes everything back on his own terms." Evelyn held the book carefully. "Does he get his revenge?" Richard looked at her. Really looked at her. "He does. But in the end, he realizes revenge doesn't make him whole. It just makes him tired." They stood there for a moment. Silent. Then Richard nodded toward the door. "You can borrow it. If you want." Evelyn thanked him quietly and left. But something had shifted. A crack in the wall. After that night, Richard started appearing more often when Evelyn was working. He'd linger in the kitchen while she prepared meals. He'd sit in the library while she cleaned. At first, the conversations were small. Surface level. Books. Weather. Nothing personal. But slowly, they went deeper. He asked her why she'd taken the job. She told him about her father. About dropping out of school. He didn't offer pity. He just listened. And that meant more than sympathy ever could. She asked him why he looked so unhappy. He laughed bitterly. "Because I am." "Then why stay?" she asked. He looked at her like the answer should be obvious. "Because leaving would mean admitting I've wasted my entire life. And I'm not ready to do that yet." She understood that. More than he knew. The conversations turned into something else. Something neither of them intended. Late nights became routine. He'd find her after the rest of the staff had gone to bed. They'd sit in the library or walk through the garden. And for a few stolen hours, they weren't employer and employee. They were just two people who felt less alone. Richard told her about his engagement. How it had been arranged by his father and Catherine Monroe's family when they were both in college. How he'd gone along with it because he didn't know how to say no. How Catherine was beautiful, intelligent, and completely indifferent to him. "She doesn't love me," he said one night. "And I don't love her. But that doesn't matter. It's not about love. It's about legacy." Evelyn didn't say anything. What could she say? One night in late autumn, after a particularly brutal argument with his father, Richard found Evelyn in the garden. She was sitting on a stone bench, wrapped in a thin cardigan, staring up at the stars. He sat beside her without asking. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then he said something that broke her guard. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" She turned to look at him. And for the first time, she didn't see the arrogant air. She saw a man who was just as trapped as she was. Just in a different kind of cage. "Every day," she whispered. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. And in that moment, everything changed. What happened next wasn't planned. It wasn't some grand romance. It was two broken people seeking comfort in the wrong place. They both knew it was a mistake. They both knew it couldn't last. But loneliness is a powerful thing. And sometimes, it makes you ignore every warning sign. The affair continued for weeks. Stolen moments. Whispered conversations. Touches that lingered too long. Richard was different with her. Softer. More honest. And Evelyn. Evelyn let herself believe, just for a little while, that maybe he could be something more than what everyone else saw. But reality has a way of crashing down. And it came in the form of a missed period. Then another. Then a positive pregnancy test she took in a gas station bathroom 30 miles away because she couldn't risk anyone at the estate finding out. Evelyn stared at the 2 pink lines for what felt like an eternity. Her hands trembled. Her mind raced. She wasn't naive. She knew what this meant. She knew what would happen. But she also knew she had to tell him. She owed him that much. Even if he didn't deserve it. She waited until late evening. The house was quiet. The staff had retired for the night. She found Richard in the library, as usual. He was sitting by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring into the flames. "Richard," she said softly. He looked up. Smiled. "Evelyn. I was hoping you'd come by." She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. "I need to talk to you." Something in her tone made him sit up straighter. "What's wrong?" She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard didn't move. Didn't blink. He just stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. "You're, what?" "I'm pregnant," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. He stood abruptly. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I took 3 tests. They were all positive." He ran his hands through his hair. Paced. Stopped. Turned to her. "How did this happen?" The question was so absurd it almost made her laugh. Almost. "You know how it happened, Richard. I mean, we were careful. Apparently not careful enough." He paced again. Faster this time. His mind was racing. She could see it. The calculations. The consequences. The damage control. "This can't happen, Evelyn," he said finally. His voice was colder now. Distant. "You understand that, right? The wedding is in 6 months. My family, Catherine's family, this would destroy everything." She stared at him. Waiting. Hoping. Praying he would say something, anything, that resembled the man she thought she knew. But all she saw was a coward. "I can help you," he continued. "I'll give you money. Enough to take care of it. And extra. To get you back on your feet." "Take care of it," she repeated slowly. "You mean?" "I mean do what needs to be done so this doesn't ruin both our lives." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known this was a possibility. She'd prepared herself for rejection. But hearing it out loud. Hearing him reduce their child to a problem that needed to be erased. It shattered something inside her. "I'm not doing that," she said quietly. His expression hardened. "Evelyn, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I'm telling you the truth. I'm pregnant. And I'm keeping this baby." "Then what do you expect me to do?" he snapped. "Marry you? Leave Catherine? Throw away everything my family has built? I don't expect anything from you, Richard. I just thought you should know." He laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "You thought I should know. How generous." She turned to leave. "Evelyn, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. "If you tell anyone," he said, his voice low and threatening, "I'll deny it. All of it. You'll be branded a liar. A gold digger who tried to trap a wealthy man. No one will believe you." And even if they did, who do you think they'll side with? She looked back at him then. And for the first time, she saw him clearly. Not the lonely man in the garden. Not the person she'd created in her mind. But the reality. A weak, selfish man who cared more about his image than the life they'd created together. I don't need anyone to believe me, Richard, she said softly. I just needed you to be decent. And you couldn't even do that. She walked out. And that was the last real conversation they ever had. 2 days later, Mrs. Calloway called Evelyn into her office. I'm sorry, dear, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. But we're letting you go. Budget cuts, you understand. Evelyn understood perfectly. She packed her single suitcase. Walked out of the Hale estate. And never looked back. Evelyn moved 3 states away. Pennsylvania. A small town called Bellwood that no one had ever heard of and no one would ever look for her in. She rented a cramped studio apartment above a Chinese takeout restaurant. The smell of fried rice and soy sauce seeped through the floorboards every night. The walls were thin. She could hear her neighbors arguing. Hear the couple next door making love. Hear the woman upstairs crying at 2 in the morning. But it was hers. And more importantly, it was far away from the Hales. From Richard. From the humiliation. She had about $3,000 saved. It wasn't much. But it was enough to survive for a few months if she was careful. She needed to find work. Fast. She applied everywhere. Retail stores. Restaurants. Call centers. But most places took one look at her growing belly and suddenly the position was filled. Finally, she found a job at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. The owner, a gruff man named Eddie, asked her one question. Can you work? Yes. Then you're hired. She worked the overnight shift. Midnight to 8 in the morning. Serving coffee to truckers and insomniacs. Cleaning tables. Refilling ketchup bottles. Her feet swelled. Her back ached. But she didn't complain. During the day, she took online courses. Business. Accounting. Anything she could afford and fit into her schedule. She studied between naps. Between meals. Between bouts of morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester. She refused to let this pregnancy define her. Refused to let Richard's rejection be the end of her story. 7 months in, she went for a routine ultrasound at a free clinic. The technician moved the wand over her belly. Paused. Moved it again. Frowned. Is something wrong? Evelyn asked, her heart leaping into her throat. No, no. Nothing's wrong. It's just. The technician turned the screen toward her. You're having triplets. Evelyn stared at the screen. At the 3 tiny forms. 3 heartbeats. 3 lives. Are you sure? Very sure. C. Baby A, baby B, baby C. The technician smiled like it was wonderful news. Like it was a blessing. Evelyn sat in silence. She didn't have the money for 1 baby. How was she supposed to raise 3? She walked out of the clinic in a daze. Sat in her car in the parking lot. And for the first time since leaving the Hale estate, she let herself cry. Not out of sadness. Out of overwhelming, crushing fear. But she didn't have the luxury of falling apart. So she allowed herself 10 minutes. 10 minutes to feel everything. And then she dried her eyes. Started the car. And went back to work. She picked up extra shifts. Worked doubles. Triples when they were available. Saved every penny. By her 8th month, she'd saved enough to move into a slightly larger apartment. 1 bedroom. A small living area. A kitchen with a working stove. It wasn't much. But it was something. She gave birth on a cold February morning. The labor was long. 32 hours. She was alone. No family. No friends. Just the medical staff. But when they placed those 3 babies in her arms, 2 boys and a girl, something inside her shifted. She looked at their tiny faces. Their perfect little fingers. And she made them a promise. I don't know how. But I will give you everything. You will never feel like you weren't wanted. She named them Daniel, Samuel, and Grace. And she meant every word. The first year was the hardest. Evelyn survived on 4 hours of sleep a night. She couldn't afford childcare for 3 infants, so she worked from home. Data entry. Bookkeeping for small businesses. Anything she could do while the babies slept in shifts. She learned to function in a permanent state of exhaustion. Learned to change a diaper with one hand while reviewing a spreadsheet with the other. Learned to survive on instant coffee and willpower. But she also learned something else. She was stronger than she ever thought possible. By the time the triplets turned 2, Evelyn had saved enough to enroll them in a daycare co-op run by other single mothers in the area. It wasn't fancy. But it was safe. And it gave her 8 hours a day to work. She applied for a junior accountant position at a mid-sized logistics firm. The interview was brutal. The hiring manager was skeptical. You've been out of the workforce for 2 years. I've been working from home, Evelyn corrected. Freelance bookkeeping. I can provide references. And you're a single mother of triplets. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. Yes. Which means I'm excellent at multitasking, time management, and working under pressure. She didn't get the job. But she got a callback for a different position. Entry level. Low pay. But it was something. She took it. And she excelled. Evelyn had always been good with numbers. But now, she was exceptional. She spotted inefficiencies in the company's expense reports within her first week. Found billing errors that had cost them thousands. Streamlined their invoicing process and saved them 15% on administrative costs in her first quarter. Her supervisor noticed. Then his supervisor noticed. 6 months later, she was promoted. Then promoted again. By the time the triplets turned 4, Evelyn had become the firm's senior financial analyst. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. She bought a small house. Nothing fancy. A modest 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood with a fenced backyard. The kids had their own rooms. She had a home office. And for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. She enrolled the triplets in preschool. Then kindergarten. She attended every parent-teacher conference. Every school play. Every soccer game and dance recital. She was there. Always. Because she'd promised them she would be. By the time they turned 5, Evelyn had been promoted again. This time to Chief Financial Officer. The youngest in the company's history. She'd rebuilt her life from nothing. From shame and rejection and a studio apartment that smelled like fried rice. And she'd done it alone. The triplets were happy. Healthy. Loved. They didn't know they were missing a father. Because they'd never needed one. Meanwhile, 3 states away, Richard Hale was preparing for his wedding. The engagement had dragged on for years. Catherine had pushed it back twice. Once for her career. Once because she wasn't ready. But now, the date was set. Late spring. A historic estate just outside the city. 300 guests. A 12-piece orchestra. A custom Vera Wang gown. It was less a wedding and more a corporate merger with flowers. Richard didn't love Catherine. Catherine didn't love Richard. But they both loved what the marriage represented. Power. Status. Security. The kind of life where appearances mattered more than truth. The guest list was carefully curated. Politicians. CEOs. Old family friends. Society columnists. Everyone who mattered. And then, during a planning meeting, someone made a joke. Remember that maid? The one who used to work for your family. Evelyn something. Richard's blood ran cold. What about her? Wouldn't it be hilarious to invite her? Just to see if she'd actually show up. Can you imagine? The poor thing probably works at a Walmart now. The room laughed. Richard didn't. But he didn't stop them either. Fine, he said. Send her an invitation. He told himself it was harmless. A joke. She probably wouldn't even respond. But deep down, in a place he refused to acknowledge, he wanted her to see what she'd missed. Wanted her to know he'd moved on. That she'd been nothing. A mistake. Forgotten. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Evelyn was in her home office, reviewing quarterly projections, when her assistant called. Miss Carter, you received something by courier. It looks fancy. Just leave it on my desk, Evelyn said absently. I'll look at it later. But later that evening, after she'd put the triplets to bed, she noticed the envelope. Thick. Cream-colored. Gold embossing. Her name written in elegant calligraphy. She opened it. And her breath caught. Mr. Richard Edward Hale and Miss Catherine Monroe request the honor of your presence at their wedding. Her hands trembled. She read it again. Then a third time. Why? Why would he invite her? She hadn't spoken to him in over 5 years. Hadn't thought about him in months. Well. That was a lie. She thought about him every time she looked at her children. Every time Daniel laughed. Every time Samuel concentrated on a puzzle. Every time Grace sang in the backyard. She thought about him. And she hated that she did. For a moment, she considered throwing the invitation away. Pretending it never arrived. But then something inside her shifted. Not anger. Not bitterness. Clarity. She wasn't the same woman who'd left that estate 5 years ago. She wasn't poor. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't ashamed. And she certainly wasn't going to hide. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. I need you to RSVP to an event for me. Of course. Which one? A wedding. She gave the details. Her assistant paused. Miss Carter, are you sure? Very sure. Do you need me to arrange a car service? Evelyn smiled. A small, knowing smile. No. I'll handle the transportation myself. The next day, she made a call to a luxury car service she'd used for corporate events. I need a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Silver. With a driver. For Saturday. Certainly. May I ask the occasion? A wedding. Wonderful. We'll have it ready for you. She hung up and sat back in her chair. This wasn't about revenge. She'd stopped caring about Richard years ago. But this was about something else. Dignity. Proof. Not for him. For herself. And maybe, just maybe, for her children. So they could see that their mother had never been small. She'd just been waiting. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, I'm still here. Let's see who's truly following this story to find out what happens when Evelyn arrives at that wedding. Trust me, what comes next is worth every second. The morning of the wedding was flawless. The kind of day that belonged in magazines. Clear blue skies. A soft breeze that carried the scent of roses and fresh-cut grass. The venue was a historic estate nestled among rolling hills and ancient oak trees. White tents. String lights. Tables draped in silk. Centerpieces that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Guests began arriving around 10 in the morning. Luxury sedans. Town cars. The occasional Ferrari or Bentley. Men in custom suits. Women in designer dresses that would never be worn twice. Air kisses. Champagne. Polite laughter. This was the world Richard had been born into. A world where appearances were everything and authenticity was a luxury no one could afford. Inside, Richard stood in a private room, adjusting his tie for the fourth time. His best man, a childhood friend named Preston, leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone. "You good?" Preston asked without looking up. "Fine." "You don't look fine. You look like you're about to throw up." Richard forced a smile. "Pre-wedding jitters." "It's normal." "Is it?" Preston finally looked up. "Because you've been engaged for like 5 years. If you're not sure by now." "I'm sure," Richard said quickly. Too quickly. Preston raised an eyebrow but didn't push. "All right. Whatever you say." Meanwhile, in the bridal suite, Catherine Monroe sat in front of a vanity mirror while a team of stylists worked on her hair and makeup. She looked stunning. Objectively beautiful. But there was something cold about her beauty. Something calculated. She'd spent 3 hours getting ready. Every detail had been planned months in advance. The dress. The jewelry. The exact shade of lipstick. Nothing was left to chance. Her maid of honor, a woman named Sloane, sipped mimosa and scrolled through Instagram. "This is going to be the wedding of the year," Sloane said. "Everyone's already posting about it." Catherine didn't respond. She was staring at her reflection, but she wasn't really seeing herself. She was thinking about the prenuptial agreement she'd signed last week. Thinking about the house in the Hamptons. The trust fund. The life she was about to lock into. This wasn't about love. It never had been. It was about security. And she was fine with that. By 11:30, guests were seated. The ceremony was set to begin at noon. The string quartet played softly. The officiant reviewed his notes. Everything was perfect. And then, at 11:45, a sound cut through the carefully orchestrated calm. Low. Smooth. Unmistakable. The purr of a Rolls-Royce engine. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. The car pulled up slowly, deliberately, coming to a stop directly in front of the main entrance. The driver stepped out first. Opened the rear door. And Evelyn Carter emerged. She wore a tailored navy dress. Not flashy. Not screaming for attention. Just elegant. Expensive. The kind of dress that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. Her hair was swept back in a sleek bun. Diamond earrings, real ones, caught the sunlight. Her posture was perfect. Confident. Calm. She looked like she belonged there. And that was the most shocking part of all. Behind her, 3 children stepped out of the car. A girl and 2 boys. All 5 years old. All dressed impeccably. The boys wore matching gray suits. The girl wore a white dress with a pale blue sash. They moved with the quiet confidence of children who'd been raised well. Loved well. And as they stepped into the sunlight, every single guest who could see them, froze. Because the resemblance was impossible to miss. The same dark hair. The same sharp jawline. The same deep-set blue eyes. They looked like miniature versions of Richard Hale. Whispers erupted. "Is that, the maid? Who are those children? Oh my God. Do you see their faces? They look just like." "No. There's no way. Look at them." Inside the venue, someone ran to find Richard. "Sir." You need to come outside. Now. Richard frowned. I'm about to get married. Whatever it is can wait. Sir. I really think you need to see this. Richard stepped outside, annoyed, expecting some minor logistical issue. A delay with the flowers. A problem with the seating chart. Something trivial. But the moment he saw the Rolls-Royce, his entire body went rigid. And when he saw Evelyn, when he saw the children, the color drained from his face. He stood there, frozen, as Evelyn walked toward the entrance. She didn't rush. Didn't hesitate. Just moved forward with quiet, undeniable purpose. Guests parted like water. No one spoke. No one breathed. They just watched. Richard's father, Edward Hale, appeared at his side. His face was a mask of controlled fury. What is this? He hissed. Richard didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Catherine emerged from the bridal suite, still in her robe, her hair half finished. Richard, what's going on? Why is everyone? She stopped when she saw Evelyn. Saw the children. Her eyes narrowed. Who is that? Edward stepped forward, blocking Evelyn's path. His voice was low but lethal. What is the meaning of this? Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. I was invited. Edward's jaw tightened. You were not invited to make a scene. I'm not here to make a scene, Evelyn said calmly. I'm here because your son sent me an invitation. And I chose to accept. You were invited as a joke, someone muttered from the crowd. Evelyn turned toward the voice. It was one of Richard's groomsmen. A man she vaguely remembered from the estate. She smiled. Not cruelly. Just, knowingly. I'm aware. She looked back at Edward. Then at Richard. I'm here because my children deserve to see the man who pretends they don't exist. The crowd gasped. Catherine's head snapped toward Richard. Richard. What is she talking about? Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. Edward stepped closer to Evelyn. If you think you can come here and extort my family, I don't want your money, Evelyn interrupted. I never did. Then what do you want? Nothing. I want nothing from you. Or from him. She looked directly at Richard now. I stopped wanting anything from you the moment you chose to erase me. The silence was deafening. Evelyn knelt down, placing a gentle hand on each of her children's shoulders. It's okay, she whispered. You don't need anything from him. She stood slowly, her gaze still locked on Richard. And then she said something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Something that cut deeper than any accusation or demand ever could. I didn't come here for you. I came here so they could see that blood doesn't equal family. And that some people aren't worth waiting for. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Richard felt his throat tighten. His hands were shaking. He wanted to say something. Anything. But what could he say? That he was sorry. That he'd made a mistake. That he'd thought about her. About them? It was too late for words. It had been too late the moment he'd offered her money to make his problem disappear. Catherine's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Richard. Are those your children? He didn't answer. Couldn't look at her. Couldn't look at anyone. Catherine's face went from confusion to understanding to pure rage in the span of 3 seconds. Are those your children? Catherine, I can explain, that's not an answer. Her voice rose, shrill and sharp. Answer me. Are those children yours? Evelyn spoke before Richard could. Her voice was gentle. Almost kind. He doesn't have to answer. You can see it for yourself. Catherine looked at the triplets. Really looked at them. And the truth was undeniable. The same eyes. The same features. The same bloodline that Richard's family had spent generations preserving and parading. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God. She turned to Richard, her eyes blazing. You had an affair. With a maid. And you have children. 3 children. And you never told me. It was before we've been engaged for 6 years, Richard. 6 years. When exactly did this happen? He didn't answer. Catherine laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. Unbelievable. I gave up opportunities for you. I turned down job offers. I restructured my entire life around this wedding. Around you. And you've been hiding an entire family? They're not my family, Richard said quietly. The words came out before he could stop them. Evelyn felt something crack inside her chest. Not for herself. But for her children. Who were standing right there. Listening. Daniel's hand tightened around hers. Samuel looked down at his shoes. Grace pressed closer to her mother's side. Evelyn's voice remained steady. But there was steel beneath it now. You're right. They're not your family. They're mine. And they always have been. She looked at her children. Smiled at them. The kind of smile that said everything would be okay. Come on, babies. We're leaving. But before she could turn away, Edward Hale spoke. His voice was cold. Calculating. If you think this little stunt will get you a payout, you're mistaken. We'll demand paternity tests. We'll drag this through court. We'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. Evelyn turned back to him. And for the first time, there was fire in her eyes. I don't need your money, Mr. Hale. I make more in a year than your son ever has. I didn't come here for a payout. I came here because I wanted to look him in the eye one more time and confirm what I already knew. And what's that? Edward challenged. That I made the right choice. Raising them alone. The crowd was utterly silent. No one moved. No one whispered. They just watched this quiet, elegant woman dismantle the Hale family with nothing but the truth. Evelyn took her children's hands. We're going home now. Wait. The voice was soft. Broken. It was Richard. He took a step forward. Then another. His eyes were on the children. On their faces. On the lives he'd never been part of. What are their names? Evelyn paused. For a moment, she considered not telling him. Considered walking away and letting him live with the emptiness. But her children deserved better than secrets. Daniel. Samuel. And Grace. Richard's breath hitched. Those were good names. Strong names. He looked at each of them. Tried to memorize their faces. I'm sorry. Evelyn's expression didn't change. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. She turned to her children. Say goodbye. The triplets looked up at the crowd. At the man who was supposed to be their father. And with the innocent honesty that only children possess, they waved. Just a small, polite wave. The kind they'd been taught to give to strangers. Because that's what Richard was to them. A stranger. And then Evelyn walked away. The driver opened the door. The children climbed inside. Evelyn followed. The door closed. The engine purred to life. And just like that, they were gone. The wedding didn't happen. Catherine refused to go through with it. She stormed off the property within 20 minutes, her half-finished hair still pinned with clips, her designer dress abandoned in the bridal suite. The guests didn't know what to do. Some left immediately, eager to escape the scandal. Others lingered, whispering, already composing the texts and emails they'd send the moment they got to their cars. This would be the story of the season. Maybe the decade. Richard stood in the center of it all, numb. His father was on the phone, already calling lawyers. Already preparing for damage control. His mother had retreated inside, mortified beyond words. And Richard. Richard just stood there. Replaying everything. Every word. Every look. The way Evelyn had held her children's hands. The way they'd waved goodbye. Like he was nothing. Because to them, he was nothing. And he had no one to blame but himself. The story spread like wildfire. By Monday morning, it was in the society pages. Not with names, but everyone knew. Socialite wedding cancelled after shocking revelation. Groom's secret children appear at ceremony. Hale family faces scandal. Richard became a pariah overnight. Friends stopped returning his calls. Business contacts grew distant. Even his father, who'd spent decades building the family's reputation, looked at him with something close to disgust. "You've destroyed everything," Edward said one evening, his voice cold and final. "Everything I built. Everything this family stood for. And for what? A meaningless affair with hired help." Richard wanted to defend himself. But he couldn't. Because his father was right. He'd thrown away everything. And he hadn't even loved her. Not really. He'd been selfish. Bored. Reckless. And now he was paying the price. Catherine released a statement through her publicist. Due to irreconcilable differences and recent revelations, the engagement between Miss Catherine Monroe and Mr. Richard Hale has been terminated. Miss Monroe wishes Mr. Hale well but asks for privacy during this difficult time. Translation: she dodged a bullet and wanted everyone to know it. The Hale family did try to pursue legal action. They demanded paternity tests. Threatened custody battles. But their lawyers quickly realized they had no leverage. Evelyn had never asked for child support. Never claimed the children were Richard's publicly. Never demanded anything. She had documentation of her income. Proof that she'd provided for her children entirely on her own. And when Richard's legal team finally contacted her, her response was swift and definitive. A single email from her attorney. "Ms. Carter has no interest in pursuing any relationship, financial or otherwise, with your client. She asks that he respect her family's privacy and refrain from any further contact. Any attempt to establish paternity or custody will be met with a countersuit for emotional distress and harassment." Richard read the email 3 times. And he understood. She didn't want his money. She didn't want his name. She didn't want him. She'd moved on. Completely. Meanwhile, back in Pennsylvania, Evelyn's life continued. She didn't tell her children the details of what had happened at the wedding. They were too young to fully understand. But she did sit them down one evening and have an honest conversation. "Do you remember the man at the wedding?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded. "The one who said we weren't his family." Evelyn's heart broke a little. But she kept her voice steady. "That's right. And he was wrong to say that. But I want you to understand something. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up. Who stays. Who loves you even when things are hard. Like you?" Grace asked. "Like me." Samuel looked up at her with those serious eyes he'd had since birth. "Do we have a dad?" Evelyn took a breath. "You have a biological father. But he chose not to be part of your lives. And that's his loss. Not yours. You 3 are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you always will be." Daniel frowned. "Did he not want us because we did something wrong?" "No, baby. No. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults make bad choices. And those choices have nothing to do with how incredible you are." She pulled all 3 of them into her arms. held them close. You are wanted. You are loved. And you are enough. Just as you are. Life went on. The triplets started first grade. Evelyn got another promotion. Her company went public 2 years later, and she became a millionaire. Not through luck. Not through inheritance. Through decades of work. Through refusing to let her circumstances define her. She bought a bigger house. Put money away for college. Took the kids on vacations they'd never dreamed of. But she also taught them the value of work. Of resilience. Of treating people with dignity, regardless of their station in life. Because she remembered what it felt like to be dismissed. To be treated as less than. And she was determined that her children would never make someone else feel that way. Daniel grew up to be thoughtful and kind. He became a lawyer. Not for the money, but because he wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. Samuel was quiet and brilliant. He studied engineering. Built things. Solved problems. Found joy in creating rather than destroying. And Grace. Grace became a teacher. She worked at an inner-city school where most of the kids came from single-parent homes. Where poverty wasn't a talking point but a daily reality. She saw herself in those children. And she made sure they knew they could become anything. Just like her mother had shown her. Richard's life took a different path. He eventually married. Not for love. For convenience. A woman named Diane who came from similar wealth and similar dysfunction. They had a civil relationship. Polite. Distant. They attended the same events. Slept in separate bedrooms. And never once discussed anything that mattered. He'd thrown himself into work after the scandal. Actually worked, for the first time in his life. As if proving something. To whom, he wasn't sure. His father passed away 5 years after the wedding. A massive stroke. Quick. Final. At the funeral, Richard stood beside his mother, shaking hands with people who'd once respected his family and now only pitied them. The Hale empire crumbled slowly. Bad investments. Shifting markets. A failure to adapt. Within a decade, most of the family's wealth was gone. The estate was sold. The properties liquidated. The legacy his father had spent a lifetime building, vanished. Richard ended up in a decent but unremarkable condo. Still comfortable. But nothing like what he'd grown up with. And every day, he thought about that morning. About the Rolls-Royce. About Evelyn's face. About the children who looked like him but would never know him. He'd Google her name sometimes. Late at night when Diane was asleep. He'd find articles about her success. Her company. Awards she'd won. He'd see family photos from charity events. Evelyn and 3 beautiful, accomplished young adults. Smiling. Thriving. Living lives he had no part of. One particular article caught his attention. It was a feature in a business magazine. From Maid to Millionaire, Evelyn Carter's inspiring journey. He read every word. The article detailed her early struggles. Her time working multiple jobs. Raising triplets alone. Building a career from scratch. It mentioned that she was a single mother but never mentioned who the father was. She'd protected him. Even after everything. The article ended with a quote. "My children are my greatest achievement," Evelyn had said. "Everything I built for them. To show them that your circumstances don't define you. Your choices do." Richard closed the laptop. And for the first time in years, he cried. Not for what he'd lost. But for what he'd thrown away. Years later, when Daniel was 25 and about to graduate law school, he asked his mother a question she'd been waiting for. They were having coffee together. Just the two of them. He'd always been the most curious. The one who asked the hard questions. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? Having us? Evelyn looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man he'd become. Strong. Principled. Kind. Not for a single second. Even though it was hard. Especially because it was hard. The hard things are what made me who I am. What made you who you are? Daniel nodded slowly. Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if our father had been different? Evelyn thought about it. Honestly. Sometimes. But then I realized that if he'd been different, you might be different. And I wouldn't change a single thing about you three. Do you think we should reach out to him? Evelyn's chest tightened. But she kept her voice neutral. That's not my decision to make. You're adults now. If you want a relationship with him, I won't stop you. But I also won't force it. What would you want us to do? She smiled sadly. I want you to do whatever brings you peace. But I also want you to understand something. He had 25 years to reach out. To be part of your lives. And he chose not to. Not because he couldn't find us. But because he didn't want the complication. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I don't think I want to know him. That's okay. I think I just wanted to know if that made me a bad person. Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand. It makes you honest. And that's the opposite of bad. Samuel and Grace felt the same way. They'd talked about it among themselves over the years. Wondered. Questioned. But ultimately, they all came to the same conclusion. They didn't need him. They'd never needed him. Because they had something better. They had a mother who'd sacrificed everything. Who'd shown them what real strength looked like. Not wealth. Not status. But the ability to keep going when everything told you to quit. The wisdom to choose dignity over bitterness. The courage to build something beautiful out of pain. 15 years after the wedding, Evelyn was attending a charity gala. Her company was a major sponsor. She was there in a stunning emerald gown, mingling with donors and board members, when she saw him across the room. Richard. Older now. Grayer. The boyish charm had faded into something weathered. Tired. He was standing alone by the bar, nursing a drink, looking like a man who'd wandered into the wrong party. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then Richard set down his glass and walked toward her. Evelyn's first instinct was to leave. But she stayed. Rooted. Curious. Evelyn. His voice was different. Softer. More genuine than she remembered. Richard. You look incredible. Thank you. They stood in awkward silence. The noise of the gala continued around them, but in their small bubble, time seemed to stop. I saw the article, Richard said finally. About your company. What you've built. It's remarkable. It was necessary. He nodded. Looked down at his hands. I owe you an apology. A real one. Not for getting caught. But for everything. For the coward I was. For the things I said. For abandoning you. For abandoning them. Evelyn studied him. Waiting. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret it. Every single choice I made back then. And yet you never reached out. I didn't think I had the right. You didn't. But that didn't mean you shouldn't have tried. Richard's throat tightened. Are they happy? Evelyn's expression softened. Just slightly. They're extraordinary. Daniel's a lawyer. Samuel's an engineer. Grace is a teacher. They're kind. They're brilliant. They're everything. Do they? He couldn't finish the question. Do they ask about you? Sometimes. When they were younger. But I told them the truth. That you made your choice. And that they were better off without someone who didn't choose them. The words were brutal. But not cruel. Just honest. Richard absorbed them like physical blows. I'm proud of what you did, he said quietly. Raising them. Building your life. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. I didn't have a choice. You did. You could have been bitter. Angry. Vengeful. But you weren't. You were graceful. Even at the wedding. Even when you had every right to burn everything down. Evelyn shook her head. Revenge would have required me to care about you. And I stopped caring the moment I walked out of your house. It was the most devastating thing she could have said. Because it was true. Can I ask you something? Richard said. Of course. If I tried to meet them. Now. After all this time. Would you let me? Evelyn took a breath. Considered. They're adults. I can't control who they choose to know. But I won't facilitate it. If you want a relationship with them, you'll have to be brave enough to ask them yourself. And you'll have to accept whatever answer they give you. That's fair. And Richard? He looked up. If you do reach out, and they say no, you don't get to make them feel guilty about it. You don't get to play the victim. You made your choices. Now they get to make theirs. He nodded. I understand. Evelyn turned to leave. Then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you found some peace. I really do. Not for my sake. But for yours. Because carrying that guilt for the rest of your life won't change anything. It'll just make you smaller. And with that, she walked away. For the second time in his life, Richard watched Evelyn Carter leave. But this time, he didn't feel anger or shame. He felt something closer to awe. Richard never reached out to the triplets. Not because he didn't want to. But because he realized Evelyn was right. They'd built lives without him. Beautiful, full lives. And inserting himself into them now would be selfish. It would be about easing his guilt, not about what they needed. So he lived with it. The weight of his choices. The knowledge of what he'd lost. He divorced Diane 3 years later. It was amicable. They'd never really been married in any meaningful sense anyway. He sold the condo. Downsized even further. Started volunteering at a youth mentorship program. Working with kids from broken homes. Single-parent households. He couldn't fix his own mistakes. But maybe he could help someone else avoid them. He never told anyone about the triplets. About Evelyn. It was the one secret he kept. The one piece of his past he didn't try to justify or explain. Because there was no justification. He'd been given a chance to be decent. To be brave. And he'd failed. That was the truth. And he had to live with it. Meanwhile, Evelyn's life continued to flourish. She'd started a foundation. A scholarship program for single mothers trying to finish their education. She funded it entirely herself. Every year, she'd meet with the recipients. Hear their stories. And every time, she saw herself. The young woman who'd been terrified and alone but refused to give up. The triplets stayed close to their mother. They had their own lives. Their own careers. But they called her every week. Visited often. Brought their partners to meet her. And eventually, their children. Evelyn became a grandmother at 52. Daniel's daughter. A beautiful little girl named Sophie. The first time Evelyn held her, she wept. Happy tears. Grateful tears. Because this right here. This was the legacy that mattered. Not money. Not status. But love. Family. The kind you choose. The kind you build. The kind that shows up. On Sophie's first birthday, the whole family gathered at Evelyn's house. Daniel and his wife. Samuel and his partner. Grace and her husband. Kids running through the backyard. Laughter echoing off the walls. Music playing in the kitchen. It was chaotic. Loud. Perfect. Grace found her mother in the kitchen, preparing dessert. "You okay, Mom?" Evelyn smiled. "More than okay." Grace leaned against the counter. "I was thinking about something today." "What's that?" "When I was little, I used to feel sad that we didn't have a dad. Like everyone else did." Evelyn's hands stilled. "And now? Now I realize we had something better. We had you. And you were more than enough." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Grace hugged her. "Thank you. For everything. For choosing us. For fighting for us. For showing us what real strength looks like. You three were never a burden," Evelyn whispered. "You were the reason I kept going." They stood there for a moment. Mother and daughter. Two women who'd learned that family wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. That night, after everyone had left, Evelyn sat on her back porch with a cup of tea. The sky was clear. Stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds. She thought about the wedding. About the Rolls-Royce. About the look on Richard's face when he'd seen the children. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel anger. She didn't feel sadness. She felt gratitude. Because if things had been different, if Richard had been different, she might have stayed in that world. Might have compromised herself. Dimmed her light. But his rejection had forced her to find her own way. To build her own life. To become someone she was proud of. In a strange way, he'd given her a gift. He just hadn't meant to. Years continued to pass. Evelyn's foundation grew. She funded over 500 scholarships. Helped hundreds of women finish their degrees. Start businesses. Build careers. Every year, she'd host a gala where the recipients would share their stories. And every year, she'd stand at the back of the room and listen. To stories of struggle. Of resilience. Of refusing to let circumstances define destiny. These women reminded her why she'd fought so hard. Why she'd refused to be a victim. Why she'd chosen grace over bitterness. Because survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about thriving. About taking your pain and turning it into purpose. Daniel became a prominent civil rights attorney. He took on cases no one else would touch. Defended people who couldn't afford representation. Won cases that changed laws. Samuel developed technology that improved renewable energy systems. His innovations were implemented in developing countries. Gave communities access to clean power. Changed lives. And Grace. Grace built a literacy program in underserved neighborhoods. Taught thousands of children to read. To dream. To believe they could be more than their zip code suggested. All three of them carried their mother's legacy. Not through genetics. But through example. They'd watched her turn nothing into everything. And they'd learned that the measure of a person wasn't where they started. It was what they did with what they were given. When Evelyn turned 60, her children threw her a surprise party. Not at a fancy venue. At home. In the backyard where they'd played as kids. Where she'd taught them to ride bikes and plant gardens and believe in themselves. The whole family was there. Friends. Colleagues. Scholarship recipients who'd become doctors and lawyers and teachers. People whose lives she'd touched without even realizing it. Daniel stood up to give a toast. "Mom, when we were kids, we didn't understand how much you sacrificed. We just knew you were always there. At every recital. Every game. Every parent-teacher conference. You worked impossible hours, but you never missed a moment that mattered. Samuel continued. You taught us that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up. Every single time. No matter how hard it gets. Grace finished. You showed us that family isn't about biology. It's about choice. About love. About showing up. And you showed up for us every day of our lives. We are who we are because of you. Evelyn stood, tears streaming down her face. I didn't do anything special. I just loved you. That's all I ever did. That's everything, Mom, Daniel said softly. That's everything. The party continued into the night. Music. Dancing. Stories. Laughter. And in the middle of it all, Evelyn looked around at the life she'd built. At the people she'd raised. At the legacy that had nothing to do with money or status or proving anyone wrong. This was the victory. Not the Rolls-Royce. Not the company. Not the success. This. Love. Family. Purpose. She'd started with nothing. Been discarded. Humiliated. Written off. And she'd turned it into this. A life of meaning. Of impact. Of joy. Richard's rejection hadn't destroyed her. It had freed her. To become exactly who she was meant to be. Late one night, several months after her birthday party, Evelyn received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "From Richard Hale." She stared at it for a long time before opening it. The message was short. Evelyn, I know I have no right to contact you. But I wanted you to know that I'm dying. Cancer. Stage 4. A few months, maybe less. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. Or to meet the children. I know I forfeited that right decades ago. I'm writing because I need you to know something. You were right. About everything. I was a coward. I chose comfort over courage. Status over character. And I've spent the last 20 years living with that choice. But watching what you built, what they became, even from a distance, has been the only light in a very dark life. You turned pain into purpose. You raised 3 incredible human beings. You changed hundreds of lives through your foundation. You became everything I could never be. And I'm grateful. Not for my sake. But for theirs. Because they deserved a parent who fought for them. Who sacrificed for them. Who loved them unconditionally. And they got that. In you. I don't expect a response. I just needed you to know. That you won. Not because you arrived in a Rolls-Royce. But because you built something real. Something lasting. Something that mattered. Thank you. For being stronger than I ever was. Richard. Evelyn read the email twice. Then closed her laptop. She didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. But because there was nothing left to say. He'd made his choices. She'd made hers. And now they were both living with the consequences. A few months later, she saw his obituary in the newspaper. Brief. Formal. No mention of children. She showed it to Daniel, Samuel, and Grace. Told them the truth. That their biological father had passed away. They were quiet for a moment. Processing. How do you feel? Samuel asked his mother. Evelyn thought about it. Sad. Not for me. But for him. Because he spent his whole life running from the one thing that could have saved him. What's that? Grace asked. The truth. That love requires sacrifice. That being a parent means showing up, even when it's hard. He never learned that. And it cost him everything. Daniel nodded slowly. Do you think we should have tried to know him? That's not for me to answer. What do you think, though? Evelyn looked at her 3 children. At the adults they'd become. I think you knew the parent who mattered. And that's enough. They sat together. In the living room of the home Evelyn had bought with money she'd earned. Surrounded by photos of birthdays and graduations and ordinary moments that had become extraordinary because they'd been shared. This was family. Not the one they'd been born into. But the one they'd built. And it was more than enough. That night, after her children had left, Evelyn sat alone with her thoughts. She thought about the girl she'd been. The one who'd believed in love and second chances. The one who'd thought kindness was currency. She'd lost that innocence. But she'd gained something better. Wisdom. Strength. The knowledge that she could survive anything. That she could build something beautiful out of ashes. Richard had invited her to that wedding to humiliate her. To remind her of her place. But he'd given her something else instead. A chance to prove, once and for all, that she'd never needed him. That she'd never needed anyone's permission to be extraordinary. She'd arrived in that Rolls-Royce with 3 children who looked like him. But they were hers. In every way that mattered. She'd won. Not through revenge. But through resilience. And that victory was sweeter than anything money could buy. So here's the question I want to leave you with. What would you have done in Evelyn's place? Would you have gone to that wedding? Would you have chosen revenge or peace? And if you were one of those children, would you want to know your father? Or would you be grateful for the parent who stayed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're mirrors. They show us who we are. What we value. What we're willing to fight for. And maybe, just maybe, they remind us that the people who try to humiliate us are often the ones most afraid of who we might become. So don't give them that power. Don't let their rejection define you. Don't wait for permission to be extraordinary. Build your life. Raise your children. Pursue your dreams. And when the people who doubted you finally see what you've become, let your success be the only statement you need to make. Not loud. Not vindictive. Just undeniable. Evelyn Carter didn't destroy Richard Hale. She didn't need to. She simply became everything he wasn't. Strong. Principled. Present. And in doing so, she taught her children the most important lesson of all. You are not defined by what was taken from you. You are defined by what you do with what's left. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Because we tell stories like this every week. Stories about real people. Real struggles. Real triumphs. Stories that remind us that life isn't about where you start. It's about where you're willing to go. And to everyone watching who's in the middle of their own struggle, who feels forgotten or dismissed or counted out, remember this. Your story isn't over. The people who underestimated you don't get to write your ending. You do. So write it well. Make it count. And when the time comes for you to arrive at your own metaphorical wedding, arrive in your own Rolls-Royce. Not the car. But the confidence. The dignity. The quiet knowledge that you rebuilt yourself. And that nobody, absolutely nobody, can ever take that away from you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. And remember, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so undeniably successful that your existence becomes the proof. Until next time. Stay strong. Stay focused. And keep building.